Welcome everyone to this Tutor Conference Insight video. Every so often the ACCA put on a conference for tutors to keep tutors up to date on changes to things like the syllabus, sense of direction, things like that. And part of the conference is subject specific. So I obviously attend the performance management breakout sessions to understand more about performance management, to understand what the examiners are looking for. And so why is it useful for you to watch this? It's only going to be a short video. The conference lasts many hours, but I try and pull out all the key points, all the key elements that I think will help students going forward. And why is this useful? Well, obviously the examining team write the questions, and they do spend a lot of time writing them and putting elements into them with a specific purpose. And it's important to understand that, because if you understand that they've put things in there normally for a reason, there's normally elements they put into questions, particularly section C questions and narrative questions. They're looking for something. They're looking to trigger something in the student in the response. And if you look at it with that approach, what's the examiner written and why have they written that? Hopefully that will help you think, well, I probably need to do something with that piece of information rather than just bypass it. And of course they mark the papers, and therefore if you can understand what frustrates them, what annoys them, what mistakes students make again and again and again, and you avoid those mistakes, the examiner is going to think, here's a student that gets it, this is great, and you will get more marks as a result. I'm going to look at some key topic areas that were raised, and these are areas where students repeatedly struggle, and there are only 4 that they picked out. So the first one was quantitative techniques, and they used the example of this past paper question called VenHOSP as a good example of a question that students should study and try and understand the quantitative techniques that are within that, because this is what they're looking for. Now, as it happens, I've done a video debrief in the revision course, and you'll find it on the examiner's report section of my revision course. So when you're getting down to the quantitative techniques part of your revision, you could jump to that examiner's report section, have a go at that VenHOSP question and look at the debrief I've done. And I've put it in the examiner's report section because it was also raised in one of the examiner's reports previously. And what I've done is tried to distill all of that detail in the examiner's report and put it into my debrief, just to make sure you can get all of that without having to sit down and read all of the examiner's reports. So quantitative techniques, one of the areas they flagged as a common area of students not doing well. Another one they raised was building block model, and they used this example of Le Macaire. As you can see, it's within my revision course. So in session 7, you'll find we've got Le Macaire as a question for you to do. I've got the answers and I've got a debrief video on that. Things the examining team raised is students often get a bit pigeonholed and don't realise that some factors can appear in more than one dimension. And they gave an example of an organisation that's developing a new app. A new app is innovative, so it could fit under the innovation part of the building block model. But you also might be doing it to save resources, so resource utilization, so it can fit under a couple of areas of the building block model. Their recommendation is don't put it under both. You'll only score marks once, but you need to choose. And if it's an either or, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is you include it under one. And the reason they don't give marks for both is their view is there should be more than enough other factors for you to answer a question like that without duplication. The other thing they mentioned with Le Macaire is it's an example of what more modern questions are like, where the examining team gives a template for you to work against rather than having to build a template yourself. So it's a really good example of a question to practice, because it's probably more likely what you're going to get in a section C question with that template. Another one that they raised as a problem again and again is limiting factor analysis, but where there's a special contract. And an example is Bella Houston. And once again, you'll find that's one of the questions I've put in the revision course with a debrief video. The important thing to remember with limiting factor analysis is you've got a few stages. Your first stage is you identify the limiting factors. There should only be one. Then you work out the contribution per limiting factor. And then you rank based on the highest contribution per limiting factor first. That's the same for all limiting factor questions. The next thing you need to do is you need to allocate your resources. If there wasn't a special contract, you allocate based on the ranking. If there is a special contract, the first thing you do is you rank to the special contract, and then you do the rest of your allocation based on the ranking you've done. That's the only difference. But what you might also be faced with is a question where you need to choose whether or not to do the special contract. So you've got a yes or no decision on the special contract. And so what you need is a working one to show what happens if you do fulfill the special contract, and a second working if you don't, if you default on it. There's often some sort of penalty, and you need to take that penalty into account when you look at the overall profit of the with and without models. So limiting factor analysis, make sure you understand it, the basics of it, and then look at what happens if there's a special contract. And I think the examining team is quite keen to push students to understand that. That, as I say, Bella Houston is an example of a good one to practice on. And then the other thing they raised is a question they get asked a lot is, why is transfer pricing so hard? Now, they didn't talk about specific questions. Transfer pricing is session 10 in the revision course. Their view is, obviously they're marking lots and lots of questions, and they think students read the question and realize it's about transfer pricing, and then they have an expectation based on previous questions they've done in their studies that this is the same. And so the advice really is read the question. Every transfer pricing question will and can be different. Don't assume it's going to go down a particular route. Make sure you read it, understand it, because there's variables and differences they can put into them. And so you need to answer specifically based on what's given to you in the question without assuming it's going to look like another one. Obviously, there's great benefit in doing practice on previous ones, but never go in assuming it's going to be a certain outcome. And that's true of any question. You should never assume it's going to be something. They will never repeat a question. They'll always have some variation elements in the question. The topic areas obviously get repeated, but the questions themselves will be different. They also spoke about techniques and things that students repeatedly do and their advice around them. And the first one is something that you'll probably know that I push a lot as well, spreadsheet functionality. The spreadsheet functionality, there's an expectation that you use the functionality in the spreadsheet. So they said you must be using formulae. And any of you that have had homework marked by me where you've written out longhand the calculation, you would see I'd have given you feedback as well. They don't want you to type something like this in the cell so they can see it. They want you to use the functionality, the formula function, where you don't do it as a comment, you do it as a formula, because they can look at that formula. You're wasting time, you're increasing the chance of errors by doing this, so always use the spreadsheet functionality. Another thing they raised is specific techniques. On occasion, a question asks for a specific technique, and if you use a different technique, you can't expect full marks. You'll get some marks if you get the correct answer, but they, on occasion, want you to specifically demonstrate that you understand how to do something in a particular way. They didn't give any specific examples, but certainly look out for that. And I think this is an example of where they want to make sure you understand the full breadth of the syllabus. And by asking for specific techniques, they're probably targeting the ones that students are less likely to understand. This comes up time and time again. Don't question spot. Their recommendation is never think what's coming up. There's absolutely no point asking that. No one will ever know what's coming up, or you'll never find that out. And they want you to understand the full breadth of the syllabus. But what the other thing they said is don't expect everything to come up. And the example they gave is many students expect variances to come up every time, and that's not the case. They will not come up every time. They'll come up a lot, but not every time. So don't be surprised if you've studied, focused on a few areas and they don't come up. That could be the case. You'll pick this up through the courses you're doing with me anyway, but reviewing your answers. There's a benefit in doing past papers. So the first step is you do some past papers or some past questions, but don't stop there. The next thing you need to do is review that answer against some model, against either my video debrief or a model answer. There's a benefit in doing this, but there's also a real benefit in doing this. And I think a lot of students underestimate how much time and resource they should put into the review. We always know the saying, you learn by your mistakes. Well, that's what the review is doing. Where did you go wrong? What would you do differently next time? Don't underestimate how much benefit there is in that review. And they also talked about the discipline of time, the allocation of time in the exam. They talked about they mark papers and it's clear that a student has run out of time and not got on to parts of the exam. Their take-home message is, it's okay to leave a question unfinished. And my view is, always think of what's the return on investment on your time. We're doing performance management here, and one of the things we should do is how do we manage our performance throughout our study and the exam. If a question, particularly a section A or a section B question, is going to take up a huge amount of time for 2 marks, just leave it, move on. Go and get those easy marks. Step through the exam, getting all of the easy marks first. If at the end you've got more time, great, loop back and try those harder ones, try those more challenging ones, but your target is to get the best out of this. We struggle to apply it to ourselves. There are studies done time and time again through all of the ACCA syllabus where they look at students who've tried to do every part of every question and those that have looked at questions that are just too hard to start with and they move on. The second group invariably do better. It's almost like a psychological barrier to leaving something. It's okay to leave it. There's probably not enough time to do every single part of a PM exam, so just do the parts that are going to benefit you most. Back to this ROI. Finally, I'll just go through a few tips that they've mentioned. The syllabus is wide and they recommend just see it as all linked. So it's all linked together. Don't see it as just a big syllabus, see it as an integrated syllabus that builds on itself. Another tip they gave, address the verb. If the verb says discuss, make sure you're discussing. If the verb says recommend, make sure you're recommending. KPIs were mentioned specifically as a tip that some struggle with, and their advice was make sure it's relevant to that organization, but also think about the intention behind these 3 letters. What are these 3 letters meaning? So the PI means performance indicator. What does that mean? They're looking for an indicator of performance. Something that isn't an indicator of performance is customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is probably more likely a critical success factor. The indicator of performance would be feedback on a survey from customers. You see the difference? The outcome is customer satisfaction, but the indicator of performance is the feedback. It's some sort of measure of performance. It might feel like a subtle difference, but make sure if you're asked to give KPIs, make sure you are giving performance indicators, not critical success factors. And then the other word is key. Don't give 10. If it asks for 1, give 1. If it asks for 2, give 2. And think what's important. What are the key performance indicators? There was a conversation around brought forward and assumed knowledge. They're obviously unhappy to commit to saying that they won't ask MA type questions in PM. And they skirted around the edge and said, well, it could be because it's all part of the syllabus. If they were to ask an MA type question, it would be in the context of an initial step into a more discursive part, because it's the application is the step up from MA to PM. So theoretically, you could get an MA type question. My view, my take on it is I think it would be very unlikely. They don't want to retest the same things. They want to test something different. And in my experience, the MA questions that are more challenging, particularly the calculations, tend to appear in a simpler way in PM. And it's the next step, it's the discursive part of that question is what they're looking for in PM. They talked about quick wins. And again, those of you who have been on my tuition course, I talk about section B outliers all the time. It's an area of focus for me. It's a key strategy when doing section B questions is look for outliers. These are more sort of general knowledge type questions. The term the examiners use were learn and churn. They also mention it in section C. You may find in section C there's part of it which is just knowledge. It's nothing to do with the question you're given. Maybe do that first. It's a quick win. It helps you sort of settle yourself into the question, and then you start to do the more integrated part of the section C question. And then finally, half marks. There was a conversation around half marks. There are no half marks in PM for discursive points. So the narrative points cannot score half marks. You can score half marks for calculations. The reason they say you cannot score them for narrative questions is they don't want to be left hanging. Either you have given them the information they need, or you haven't. And the mark is only awarded if you have. This goes back to points I sprinkle through the course and through feedback. How do you get the full marks is around the application. So you would say what and why. You'd maybe make your point and an implication. And it's this second part that's needed to score the mark, but the second part in isolation doesn't work. So you need the first part to lead on to the second part. And one of the examining team said something which I think is worth stating. He said, I don't want your opinion. I want to know why that is your opinion. I'll say that again. I don't want your opinion. I want to know why that is your opinion. And obviously it will depend on the exact question. It's so easy to just say something, profit has gone up, which is good. It doesn't add any value, and you've really got to think for that narrative discursive question. It's that second element. Profit has gone up, which is good, and maybe there's a background, particularly as the economy has struggled in the same period of time. There's going to be elements of information in the question that they want you to link together and loop back. That's where you're getting those narrative marks. Well, there's a little bit of an insight to what's going on in the examiner's minds, and hopefully this will help you as you go through your studies and your revision to just gather more and more marks. Hopefully this will all help. Thanks for listening.